Hello and welcome back. I'm Dr. Swope. We're going to continue on with our virtual review, AP Psychology, getting you ready for the exam that's coming up on May 19th. So let's just kind of jump in. Let's talk about what we're going to do on our today. Today we're going to talk about intelligence and all of the kind of things that go with it. The first bullet point, the first two words are define intelligence. And if you've been taking an AP psychology class all year round, you should almost kind of look at those two words and kind of laugh because, that's really the big question is how do you do it? And so like in psychology, if we can't define it precisely, we're going to list characteristics. We're going to get as close as we can. The second bullet point is discuss culture and how culture defines or influences the definition, because it comes down to values. What does a culture value? What does that mean for intelligence? Compare and contrast. If you've been taking a class, and I think a lot of you all who are watching this have been through, maybe starting in September or last August, you've been exposed to this. And so there's a lot of theorists. So we're going to try to sort them out, compare and contrast them, so you have a good firm idea of who came up with which and assign a vocabulary word to each of those. We're also going to look at how would you design a test, including the concept of standardization. The next one, interpret meaning of scores in terms of the normal curve. This is important. We're going to talk about this towards the end of today, the normal curve, because it's not just in today's lesson. It also has a link back to the all-important research method. And remember, of course, one of the bigger parts of the AP psychology curriculum is not just content knowledge, it's skills. Can you analyze data? Can you look at curves and graphs and pull out some meaningful information? So today's stuff's kind of important because it covers two areas. And then we're looking at labels according to intelligence testing. Describe relevant labels. And then the last one is we're looking at testing practices, particularly in relation to culture fair tests. And I think if you have been along in the ride for AP psychology since the last fall, or maybe even January, we got a couple folks who take a curriculum or semester-based classes. That oftentimes intelligence tests have had a pretty bad history of being misapplied for maybe a political agenda. Okay, but before we jump into what we're going to do today, let's look back at our research, our practice from yesterday, our homework. Researchers conducted a naturalistic study of children between the ages of 5 and 7 years old. The researchers visited classrooms during a class party celebrations. As a measure of hyperactivity, they recorded the number of times child left their seats. The researchers found a strong positive correlation between sugar snacks offered at the party and hyperactivity. Based on these findings, the researchers concluded that sugar, here's the magic word, causes hyperactivity. Okay, so point A and point B, before I jump into the actual meat of answering this, I want to talk about point A, why people may easily accept the conclusion. And then point B has a different kind of question. So you can't just blindly define and apply. You got to answer the question. Okay, confirmation bias is an erroneous thinking process where a person seeks support for their already established conclusions. Okay, I think we've seen that before in Mrs. Fenton's videos and in my videos. So now we're going to accept the conclusion. How do the researchers use this? If the researchers believe that sugar caused hyperactivity, then they might only notice behaviors they thought were hyperactive, meaning they would ignore, a child perhaps sitting quietly. Okay, and we're going to go deeper. Confirmation bias is not limited to researchers. Most people are uncomfortable with facts that conflict with their own opinions. Since researchers are people, they can unconsciously or even consciously ignore data that conflicts with their beliefs. Okay, pretty straightforward. Availability heuristic is a thinking shortcut. Remember, we talked about shortcuts yesterday. Is a thinking shortcut where a person uses a solution that is most easily recalled. So researchers might have heard the popular idea that sugar causes hyperactivity. And since that information was present in their mind, that is what they applied to their study of hyperactivity. And we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper with that. Availability heuristic is using a strategy that is often used. So if a common idea is that sugar causes hyperactivity, the researchers are going to use that for their hypothesis and not that a party atmosphere could cause excited behavior. And I don't know the actual fact of what if sugar causes hyperactivity. There's so many confounding variables in that, but I think a lot of people just believe that. And if researchers, if it's because they're people had heard that, that's going to help them frame their mindset, frame their hypothesis going into this study. Okay. Belief perseverance can be thought of as simply being stubborn and persevering in your beliefs no matter what. If the conclusion of the study does not show significance, then the researchers might think their own study was done wrongly and persevere in their belief. And look, we did, even though the results are right in front of them of their own study, because it conflicts with what they want, they're not going to believe it. Um, if availability heuristic can be thought of as occurring before a problem because the solution existed in the researcher's mind before the study, belief perseverance occurs after because it means the researchers will continue to believe their previous opinions even though the data clearly shows their beliefs were wrong. Okay, we're going to look at hypothesis. A hypothesis is a prediction of results. In an experiment, it is a prediction that if the independent variable is changed, then there will be a change in the dependent variable. Okay, let me give you a quick caution going forward, the 2020 AP Psychology exam. You don't want to abbreviate these. I did this primarily so they'd stay kind of in my nice little text box, but just for space sake, but you want to write them out, okay? Um, a possible hypothesis would be that if one group is given a candy bar and the other group is given a sugar-free candy bar, the group that got the sugar will act differently. Okay, and you notice we built in the if then. Okay, that's the important part of the hypothesis. In a synonym, what most people think of as a hypothesis is the alternate hypothesis. Now we're kind of demonstrating to our reader, hey, we know more than what was in our definition in our application. So we're going to go a little deeper and we're going to bring in some other words. What most people think of as the hypothesis is the alternate hypothesis. That predicts a significant effect will happen. A null hypothesis predicts there will not be a significant result. Okay, let's operationally define the dependent variable. First, let's say the dependent variable can be thought of as the result or product of an experiment. An operational definition is something that can be measured. Okay, so now we're going to apply it. Hyperactivity could be operationally defined as the number of times a child left his or her seat without permission. Okay, operational definition needs to make something countable. A behavior of leaving the seats can be recorded, but the label of being hyperactive might be too subjective. One person's opinion of what is hyperactive might be different than another person's opinion of what is hyperactive. So you want to make a behavior that's countable. Random assignment occurs once participants have volunteered. Then they are separated into the control group and the experimental group. Now we're going to apply it, of course. Once the group of children has been identified, their names can be entered into software that automatically randomizes them into two groups. The important part of random assignment is that each participant has an equal chance of being placed into either group. This would help reduce experimenter bias. Okay. All right, that took care of our homework. And again, Mrs. Fenton and I and your teachers and you, your id, if you know what that is, sorry, your super ego is begging you to actually write these down. Again, don't just be a passenger on this. Give it a shot. Time yourself. Remember the concept of overlearning. The more you do it, the more it becomes automatic. And if you do this enough with enough practice, not only will you get a 5 on the AP exam, you'll do it probably without even consciously trying. Okay. Okay, let's talk about culture and how culture influences the definition of intelligence. Okay, well, what is intelligence? And you and I could, and psychologists and philosophers could debate this all day long. So let's change the question and say, well, who is intelligent? And if you are a high school student and you've spent, years of your life in school, what you think is intelligent is going to be a reflection of what the school values are, and that might be math and reading. Okay, and look at what the SAT is about. So the culture of the school in which you grow up is going to frame your definition of what is intelligence. And I don't think that I have to over-explain it. These questions are based on values and maybe circumstances too. Do you want intelligence to be useful, something that is going to help you save time as you have to do your chores? Something that's going to save you a couple minutes every day, or theoretical, like the concept of relativity, that idea. So, we got a lot of questions about what is, but we know what helps us shape it is culture. So let me ask you, if you were a high school kid, what's a more important ability, to read fast or to have street smarts? And when I do this in my class, a lot of kids are like, street smarts, you don't know what it's like out, and I kind of laugh at that, because we'd have to define those, to read fast. And we're assuming that they have to be either or. And the reality is we're going to find that many types of intelligences blend and work together. Okay, so let's talk about Gandhi. Gandhi is known as an international peacemaker, but would you put him in the same category as Einstein? Okay, so who's smarter, Gandhi or Einstein? Elon Musk, obviously brilliant. Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame. Shakespeare. Now, Shakespeare and Einstein, we got math and English. Who's smarter? Abraham Lincoln. For his political ability to navigate a very difficult political time during the Civil War, or as a throwback to our friend Mrs. Fenton, that's an interesting idea. How would you measure a teacher's intelligence? The temptation is if you're a teacher and you have to answer this objective in the course exam, or the course, what's called description or curriculum, the temptation is to put out a list of cultures and say the American culture values this intelligence, and the Brazilian culture measures this intelligence. And that's a little bit risky. That's a little too simplistic and borderline racist, because you don't want to say, well, what is the American culture? Do males have a different culture than females, and those kind of things? And that brings us to a word called homogeneity. Homogeneity comes from the social psychology standpoint. And homogeneity means, if you ever thought, "Oh, they're all like that, you know how they are." That's the concept of what's called homogeneity, where you blend a group of people into one group, so you make it easier for you to think about. And we want to be careful about that. I don't want to call out any specific culture, but I can use these characteristics. Individualistic culture in the United States is a very individualistic culture. We're all about getting our scores, our paycheck, maybe our transcript, our AP credit, so we can go to college and get your own singular degree. And I don't think a lot of folks going through high school, when you earn a good grade or you earn credit, did your family earn it? Well, they kind of helped you get there. And if you think your family earned it, like your AP score is your family's achievement, you shouldn't be, just because you took the test, everyone contributed. That would be a collectivist culture. So if we're going to look at values, individualist culture, maybe intelligence is defined as gathering resources for yourself. And if you look at Jeff Bezos, he kind of came up with the concept of Amazon, and has more money than he could almost count. If that's the case, he would be by far being a genius. Okay, working well within a group. Okay, that might be a different type of intelligence. In an individual culture, we might not value it and or define it as such. As you can look at the bottom bullet point, what does the SAT say is important? And does that shape who you think is intelligent? People who get the highest score, does that mean they're intelligent? Not necessarily, but it's kind of hard to separate a high score on the math part of the SAT with someone who's intelligent. So, there is overlap, but we still haven't been able to define it. We just know that culture shapes our idea of what is intelligence. Okay. See if I can advance this slide here. There we go. So I've got a bunch of traits here. Take a look at them. Okay. I've got someone who is great at clapping. Now, that might not be the first kind of thing you think of what is intelligent, what is an intelligent trait. How about way over here, the ability to be kind? Okay, in the middle, you got inductive logic. Can you compute fast? If I said to you, what is the square root of 5,992? Would you be able to do that right away? Was that a type of intelligence? How about find connections or see patterns? So, can you lick your own elbow? I'm not sure that's a type of intelligence, but maybe that's my culture telling. So what we're going to look at is the idea of factor analysis. So what if you can see that there are certain data points? Imagine there are almost an unlimited amount of data points that relate to intelligence. And if you can start to see patterns or connections and you can group them together, the technique that's going to help us with that is called factor analysis. It's a complex statistical technique that finds relationships. And so using this, we can say this big circle. Well, if you look at stuff there, that's going to be a lot of school based or what we might consider traditional intelligence. That person's smart, man. They can do math, they can apply logic, they can see patterns, they can find connections. That would be great academic skills. This other smaller circle, those groups might come together, but are they going to be grouped as what we consider intelligence? So you can see you can use factor analysis to find relationships. Okay. And over here, I'm not sure what, licking your own elbow, is that related to clapping? And if you can do both of those, what, good on you. I'm proud of you. What about specific abilities? So notice we have G. Okay, and we're going to learn that G is a general mental ability. General mental ability is made of smaller things grouped together. How do we find the grouping? We're going to use something called factor analysis. Here's another group. However, what if there are specific abilities? Okay, so we're going to learn a little bit later on. We have G for general mental ability and specific abilities that might be a little bit separate. And we're going to look at three researchers, or three theoreticians, Thurstone, Gardner, and Sternberg, who said, you know what, maybe intelligence isn't one thing. Maybe it's made up of a smaller groups of things. Okay. So now, if we look at these individual items, is the ability to compute fast, to do math equations fast, is that related to, oh, I don't know, being kind? If they're not, then maybe that lends idea to the idea that intelligence isn't one thing. It can be divided, it can be broken up into smaller bits. Okay. So I mentioned the idea we got Thurstone, Gardner, Sternberg, and Spearman, and we have kind of a descending order of numbers. Now, Thurstone suggested there were 56 aspects of intelligence, and then the question is, and I don't know what they all are. I don't have them memorized. At what point does a number become too big to be useful? So, if the SAT, for instance, was broken down into math and verbal, should they have other scores? And if so, how many would a college admissions counselor become overwhelmed with? 12, 13, 22, 56? So I think intelligence is a huge thing, and we further should subdivide it. The question is, how far? How much is too much of a subdivision? You might have heard of Gardner. Gardner is a little bit more well known with his 8 ideas of what's called the multiple intelligences. Um, and then some people were going to say, well, music's not really intelligence, it's just a skill. Why would you say one versus the other? I like the idea. Some people say kinesthetic, that's not intelligence, that's just athleticism. Well, remember, athleticism exists in the brain. Athleticism exists in the synapses. Okay. So it's not because you have a better physique, it's because you trained your brain. So maybe that is an intelligence kind of thing. Now we look at number 6 and 7, interpersonal and intrapersonal. Okay, we're going to link that to someone named Daniel Goleman and his idea of emotional intelligence. I remember vividly a conversation I had with another student, another colleague, who they kind of denigrated this. They said, you know what, that's not intelligence. The ability to calculate math, that's that's intelligence. The ability to come up with new ideas, that's intelligence. And my rejoinder to that was, give me a job that doesn't deal with people. Okay. Give me a job where you're not going to be stressed. And so if you look at Goleman's subdivision of emotional intelligence, you have delayed gratification. Can you tell yourself no? Okay. Can you tell yourself not right now? I know Dr. Swope's boring. I really want to hit pause video and go do something fun, but can you make yourself watch a boring video? Delay your gratification of doing what you want to do till after this video. Can you self-soothe when you're stressed? Can you then find a way to get yourself back to a place that is healthy? Do you know your own emotions? All of us have been mad or upset and you really didn't even know why. Can you figure that out quicker? And can you know others' emotions? Can you relate to what other people are feeling? And I think these ideas are related to Gardner's 6 and 7. And I just want to expand the idea of culture. We've all, if you're watching this, you're probably a very good student. You grew up in a very probably rigorous academic environment with high standards, and that shaped how you think of intelligence. And I'm not saying one's not good or bad. I'm just saying expand the definition. Okay, Sternberg has his triarchic theory. Okay. Um, and analytic might be more analogous or more in line with traditional intelligence. Can you analyze data and can you come up with meaning from that? Creative might, of course, go along with that. Practical intelligence, common sense. How do you define that? So Sternberg says it's not enough just to think big ideas. Can you make them work in the real world? And you can see there's going to be an interaction between these. And then Spearman is the one that came up with G. He firmly believed, and there is evidence to say that if you're good in one type of intelligence, you're probably good in several other related types of intelligence. He's going to group that together as one general type of intelligence. Maybe, for lack of a better, we can call that IQ. However, there might be a specific type of intelligence that exists separate from the general. So it's possible someone might have an average intelligence, but in one very different area, they have a ridiculous skill. Okay. And so those two things might exist separately, but together, general intelligence is what we know as intelligence. Okay. So, like I said, Spearman has his G, general mental ability. And what he said is where there's above average ability in X, there's probably above average ability in Y. And maybe you're that type of student in high school where you've got good grades all across the board. Things come naturally to you. Or maybe you're the type of student who, you know what, you're a good student, but you look at other students like, how do they do that? Man, they get an A in this, they get an A in this without even trying. That's going to support Sternberg's idea. And you'll notice that in school, people don't just get a good grade in one subject often. If they got good grades, they got good grades across the board. Now, of course, there are confounding variables and there's motivation and other things like that. But Spearman's idea is if you're smart in one area, you're probably smart in a lot of related ideas. Okay. Cattell took Spearman's idea of G and he's going to kind of put a twist on it. G of F, or what we call fluid intelligence, is youth or speed processing large amounts of data. And if you look at the teen brain, the fluid intelligence may be off the charts. Think of what a teenager goes through, maybe 7 classes per day, 5 of them academic. Many of you are taking multiple AP classes. You are inputting a ridiculous amount of information and your brain is very fast. It is great at processing this. If you were to plug my old boomer brain and I had to learn what you had to learn and all this new stuff, not only in school with multiple APs and academic subjects and drivers and first job, driver license and all these kind of things, that's a lot. Fortunately, the teen brain is really good at processing all that information. It's fast and it's flexible. Okay. Now, the crystallized intelligence, I hate to say maybe a little bit slower. You can imagine crystal fluid in your mind. You can imagine that moves fast. Crystallized is experience using heuristics, using shortcuts. So, you know what? It's true. Your grandparents might not be as fast at assuming or incorporating new information, but they've lived a long time. They know a lot of shortcuts. For a teenager, nearly every problem is a new problem. It's the first time they've seen it because they haven't lived a long life. But I guarantee you, when you apply to grad school, it's going to be a lot less stressful than when you apply to college for the first time because you've already seen it. You've already built up a heuristic of how to solve that. The idea is you follow people over a long time, and we're going to dispel really the myth of ageism. Older folks, as they get older, you know what, they are going to get a little bit slower because the brain is a biological organ and there is going to be some decay, but there is a use it or lose it situation. Okay. The more you use your brain, the more active your brain's going to be. It's going to regenerate itself. And remember, synaptogenesis means that your brain does grow, and neurogenesis, your brain does grow new neurons. For the longest time, we thought you're born with all the neurons you get. That's not necessarily true. So use it or lose it. And I want you to challenge your grandparents, keep them active, make them learn new stuff. Okay, let's look at some of the intelligence tests and the people that came up with some of the intelligence tests. Okay, you've got Alfred Binet. It probably kicked the whole thing off, but of course, the trivia you might know is Binet wasn't a psychologist at the time. He was trying to kind of match educational processes. How are we going to teach school children better? Should we match teaching amount and content and pace with a certain type of student? So we wanted to make sure that you're getting students with certain ability to get certain content and you get like that. What his idea is, you're going to compare a child against what most of the children at his age can do. So you come up with this idea of a mental age. Okay, let's look at a mental age. Let's look at what most 7-year-olds can do. Can they ride a bike without training wheels? I think so. Can they tie their shoes by themselves? I think so. Can they, maybe verbally, can they write a compound sentence? Can they know their math facts up until a certain point? So if you get all of the things that most 7-year-olds can do, and you got a bank of different skills, then you compare an individual against that kind of bank of skills. So if you have a 7-year-old and their chronological age is 7 and they have the mental age of 7, well, 7 divided by 7 is 1. 1 times 100 is 100. So the average IQ is 100. Pretty much makes sense. Now, if you have a 10-year-old, but they have the mental age of an 8-year-old, well, 8 divided by 10 times 100 is 80. And if the average IQ is 100 and they're below that, well, they're below average. This is called ratio based. And because obviously we're comparing a ratio of mental age to chronological age. You know what? The problem with this is going to fall apart as people get a little bit older. Think this through. What can a 34-year-old do that a 33-year-old shouldn't be able to do? And so as someone gets older, we're going to need a different model. And we get to the idea of Lewis Terman, who worked at Stanford. He took this idea, and it's going to be renamed the Stanford-Binet test, not the Terman-Binet test, because Terman worked at Stanford. And the idea is, and we're going to see this towards one of the last slides, is you're going to compare a child against a large bank of acquired scores. No more about what the average child could do, or a mental age, or what a child's skill should be. You're going to find, if you can squint in there, 100 is the average. And most people are going to be, at the hump of the curve, most people are going to be in the middle. Very few people are going to be this far away from that. Very few people are going to be this far away from it. And we're going to see what this kind of translates into. If Binet's idea was ratio based, Terman's idea is called a deviation IQ, or deviation based. Wechsler, if you have taken an intelligence test, you've probably taken a Wechsler-based test. If you're an adult, you take the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. If you're a child, you take the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, WISC. The interesting thing here, it gives subtests and it gives a general score like Spearman's G, but it also gives subtest scores to help maybe figure out maybe there's a mismatch, and can we address it? Can we exploit that? If a child has a certain ability here, well, let's teach to that. Let's expand that. Okay. We're going to have to compare and contrast many of these theoreticians. We talked already about Binet, Wechsler, Spearman, and Cattell. Okay, but let's go in. Binet kind of kicked off the Stanford-Binet test. Remember, it was revised by Terman of Stanford University. And the description is it's a popular test to measure IQ. Okay, it's historically this is what people used, and it's worked for a while. We're going to get into the idea of reliability and validity. Okay, now Wechsler's idea, I want to say it's better, but it's more often used. And it's probably one of the best intelligence tests out there. I don't think you can take it at home. I wish we had an interaction ability. I could see if you raise your hand or chimed in on Zoom. And I could say, I wonder how many people have taken one of those intelligence tests on their laptop, and everyone, of course, gets to be a genius. Well, I'm not sure that's going to be based on Wechsler's adult intelligence scale. It's probably based on a website that wants you to keep clicking on their clickbait, right? Spearman had his idea of general intelligence. Remember, that's the G factor. He also came up with the S factor of specific intelligence. Okay, Cattell took the G and said there's G fluid, G of F, and G of crystallized. Okay, and fluid intelligence is biologically influenced intelligence, a speed of processing data. And then crystallized intelligence, can you incorporate what you've learned using experience? Okay, we're still not done. There's a lot of theorists in here. Okay, let's talk about Sternberg. Okay, now how many E's do you have in Robert Sternberg? You have 3 E's. That's going to help us remember the triarchic 3-part theory of intelligence. And Sternberg had his idea of analytical, creative, and practical. Gardner had his multiple intelligence, and you know what? People love this idea because you know what? It makes us all feel good, because if I'm of an average intelligence, well, I can say, you know what? Well, maybe in a specific way I'm smart. And I think the phrase is, it's not how smart you are, it's how are you smart. And a lot of people really like Gardner's idea, especially elementary school teachers, because they say we just need to find and reach where the child is intelligent and teach to that. And so I'm not going to over explain or relist all of his eight parts of it. Goleman, you'll recall we went over emotional intelligence, and you had a couple factors in there, and it basically means working within yourself and working to kind of coordinate your emotional state with other people's emotional state. Okay, let's move on. Standardization. So an intelligence test is going to produce results, but are these results worth anything? How do we get there? Well, first thing we got to know is a result by itself is kind of meaningless. Think this through. If you have grades from different teachers in schools, and maybe in your school is large enough, you have several psychology teachers or several US history teachers or something like that. And some teachers have the reputation of being a really hard teacher, and some teachers have the reputation easy A. So grades by themselves, unless there's not a standardized idea, well, they're kind of meaningless. And of course, this is why we have standardized tests like the SAT, like intelligence tests, and like AP psychology exam. If you get a lot of data, and I'm talking thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of scores over enough time, and you put them together and compare them, it's going to be a bell curve. This is not just for IQ. I think you know this. This is for height. This is for weight. This is for income. This is for number of calories eaten in a day. If you get a large enough data, it's going to fall a bell curve. Most people are going to be in the middle. Most people are pretty normal and average. Very few people eat 20,000 calories a day, and very few people eat 2 calories a day. Most of us eat kind of the same number, right? Okay, so that's standardization. And again, it's we're comparing against a large data set. Now we're looking at reliability. Are scores consistent over time? So if you took an intelligence test now and you are found to be 100 average, and you're like, that's not me, I know I'm a genius. And then you take the same intelligence test next week and you score a 145, you are a genius by any measure. Well, which one was accurate? Of course, you're going to say the 145 because that's the self-serving bias. But what are we going to do with the score? One of those is inaccurate. And if those are inaccurate in that close of a time, test isn't reliable. I use the broken scale analogy. If you have a scale that's broken and reads 100 pounds, if you step on that scale, it reads 100 pounds. Someone else steps on the scale, it's 100 pounds. Someone else, it's 100 pounds. Well, you know what? That is perfectly reliable, but it's not valid. Okay. And you need to have reliability and validity. So how do we establish reliability? One way is called the split in half technique. If you have 100, maybe your teacher should do this. If you have 100-question unit test, and what they should do is see how you do in the first 50 questions and see how you do in the last 50 questions. If you did the same approximately in both, that test has reliability and maybe even validity. However, if you find out that you did really badly in the last half, that test has some problems because one part of it's significantly more difficult. You don't have to do first and second half. You could just compare odd and even numbers or third groups. And that's how you test the test against itself, called the split in half measure. It's important to know that reliability is necessary, but not sufficient. Reliability alone, yielding a consistent result, like a broken scale, is, you want to get consistent result, but like a broken scale, it's not necessarily valid. So we're going to have reliability and validity. While we're talking about reliability, let's talk about this thing called the Flynn effect. First, let me say it's documented and it's reliable and it's valid, but it's not very well understood. No one knows what causes it. Generally, each generation seems to score a little bit higher on intelligence tests than previous generations. There's a very kind of a small increase from generation to generation. Taken against a long time, maybe 100 years, you're going to see a pretty big increase. Does that mean that people now are smarter than people then? Well, I'm not going to go that far. I just know that the scores are marginally higher each generation. Over a long amount of generations, the difference gets bigger. We don't know why. Is it nutrition? Is it better pediatric care? Is it better prenatal care? Is it that societies are more complex? We just don't know what causes it. There's a lot of confounding variables. Okay, types of validity. If reliability is consistency over time, validity has this big question. Does a test measure what it says it measures? So for instance, if you're a good student and you're watching this, I'm presuming that you're a certain demographic, you care about your academics. Let's say you took a test and you studied, man, you knew that, but you got the results back and you didn't do very well. Did your teacher create that? Was that test valid? Did it measure what it claimed to measure? So it's not just enough to say there's validity. There are several types of validity. Okay. Content validity is, does the test have content that it should have? So for instance, if your teacher gives you a unit exam in US history and they're pulling in questions from AP World, it's not going to have content validity. Okay. Construct validity. This is probably the most important one. The degree to which the test accurately measures what it's designed to measure. So here's the huge question. Do intelligence tests actually measure intelligence? Or do they measure how well you do on intelligence tests? Do they measure test taking ability? Now, some people say test taking ability is a function of intelligence. And you can see we can go round and around in that philosophical debate. How do you operationally define intelligence? How do you take this abstract concept and put a number to it and make it countable? Criterion validity measures how well the test correlates with an outcome. So for instance, if you make up an intelligence test and you score really, really high on your own intelligence test, but you have trouble, walking and chewing gum at your own time, or where when you're texting, you have to stop because you can't walk and text. Do those two things meet with each other? Or what if someone who is supposedly not very smart, but you know what? They're well liked, they have a great job, they've got great income, they're doing very, very well in all aspects of life. Maybe that test isn't measuring what it's supposed to measure. Predictive validity, I want you to think SAT. The SAT is a predictive test. And the hypothesis is if you do well in the SAT, then you have a probably, and that's the important key word, you will probably do better than someone who doesn't score as well. SAT is great, and you're looking at large data sets, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 million people who've taken the SAT, and you get this nice bell curve. But it's not very predictive. It's not very valid for an individual. If you get a low score in the SAT, that doesn't really apply to you as an individual. You can do quite fine in college. Face validity is the idea of, does the exam have a proportional number of questions to match their curriculum goal? And I think you've seen throughout this school year that up until this COVID-19 thing that kind of turned the world on sideways, the AP exam was supposed to cover this percent from this content, this percent from this content, and this percent from this content. And if the test doesn't match the curriculum percentages, well, then it's not going to have face validity. So ideally, the test is supposed to match what the student or what the test taker has been preparing for. That's called face validity. Okay, now we're going to interpret this thing called a bell curve. And this right here, one more time, is really important, not just for this chapter, but it goes back to some of the skills that you will probably be asked on the second FRQ. Okay, so that's a hint right there. You really should take some time and memorize this. I'm going to go relatively quickly, but flip back, open this in your book, rewatch this video, or look this up on your own, because I urge you to memorize these percentages. But before I talk about the percentages, let's take a look at this. Okay, right in the middle at the bottom, you have 100. 100 is the average IQ on the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. Okay, the next unit away, the next difference, and I'm kind of use these words playfully. If I use the word difference, well, then I'm going to substitute deviation. The next deviation up is 15 away. Then 15 away. And you can see there's a standard kind of unit of difference. See what I did there? A standard unit of difference or a standard deviation. So the standard deviation is 15, 15, and 15. Okay, and you can see it follows that pattern too. It's important to note that just for your own, you just got to memorize this. 100 is the average IQ, and the standard deviation is 15. So if you are 2 standard deviations away, then you add 2 15s and you get to 130. So one standard deviation is 115, another standard deviation is 130. Okay. Here's the important thing, and again, this does not just apply to intelligence. It can apply to height and weight and income level, or pretty much any what's called ordinal variable. That's an ordinal variable, numerical, anything that you can count. If you get enough data, it will fall into a nice bell curve. The average might not be 100, and the standard deviation might not be 15, but it will fall into a curve. So if everything falls into a curve, then this is why you have to memorize these percentages. Ready? 34% of any given population, if you get enough data, is going to fall between the mean and 1 standard deviation. That makes sense. Think this through. Look, the bulk of the people are between these two standard deviations. The bulk of them, 68%. That's just about 2/3 of the people fall between one standard deviation below, one standard deviation above. Only 13.5% fall between one standard deviation above and two standard deviations above. Similar down here. It's really rare to be this far away from the mean. It's incredibly rare to be this far away from the mean. And so you can see very few people score this high on an intelligence test. All right, I think I've talked that to death. I hope that makes sense to you. Now, if we're going to look at where people fall in relation to the mean, let's talk about some of the labels. Okay, intellectual disability is not one thing. It's multidimensional. That makes sense because I don't think intelligence is one thing. Yes, there's the G factor, and yes, there is one number. Hopefully, it's a 3-digit number of IQ. Okay, but if the IQ is a 2-digit number or really far away from it, it's made of many different things. So intellectual disability, if intelligence is made of many different things, maybe intellectual disability can't just be one thing. There's many causes: a genetic, chromosomal. TBI means traumatic brain injury. Maybe it's a chemical poisoning, even from prenatal, or for a variety of other possible unfortunate events, or unfortunately neglect. Let's say that you have a child who tragically, not hit, not abused, not neglected. I'm sorry, not hit, not physically abused, but if they were ignored, remember the human brain craves stimulation. If children weren't, talked to and played with and nurtured, maybe their brain won't grow the way it should. There are a couple dimensions, and we're not going to go through them too deeply, but abstract ability, this makes sense. These might be what you're familiar with in high school. Folks with an intellectual disability might have reduced ability to think abstractly. Similarly, they might have reduced social abilities, whether it's empathy, what is appropriate in a given situation, how to interact, and communication skills, and then practical. The idea of self-management, self-care, job, what kind of job in an everyday situation could someone with an intellectual disability perform? So remember, it's not one thing. It's a very sensitive topic. And so because it's not one thing, we're going to move on, okay, to the other side of the bell curve. Okay, you need to know the word a prodigy, and there's different definitions for this. A prodigy is a child who has an amazing ability, almost an adult-like or an expert adult-like ability. And is that because the parents sat them down at 3 years old and said, here, you're going to play this violin for 6 hours a day? Maybe. Is it because the child had a innate gift, genetic? Maybe. Is it because those two things came together? Probably. So that's what a child prodigy is. A savant syndrome is having an amazing genius-like ability, but in an extraordinarily narrow area. For instance, the ability to instantly calculate square roots. Okay, and if you threw someone out a 5-digit number and said, give them a square root instantly, as fast as you and I could do 2 + 2, they could give you that square root. Okay, that's great, but does that translate into a different area? And if it doesn't, that might be a savant-like ability. Okay, genius, generally scoring 2 standard deviations above the mean. So if we were to go back to our IQ score, we're going to say genius is going to be, you have to be above this level. Depending on the score, if it's Wechsler's adult, it's going to be about 130, 131. Different intelligence scores might have different numbers, but the metric is the same, 2 standard deviations above mean. Okay, it's important to know the word psychometric test. Intelligence tests fall into the large category of psychometric tests, and there are a wide variety of tests designed to measure the mind, whether it's creativity, whether it's intelligence, whether it's a learning disability. So psychometric tests often used. Now this is where it gets weird. Ready? Because I would like you, here's an assignment for you. I want you to make an intelligence test that doesn't depend on your knowledge. Make a test that you can't make because I want you don't use your own knowledge. That's kind of tough to do. So if traditionally tests are based on what the test taker knew, well, isn't it going to be a little bit biased? So we want to look at what's called culture fair tests used. Okay. And the idea is, how do you create content on a test question that is accessible to everyone, not just people who grew up in a similar background as the test maker, but people of all backgrounds. And how do you make it what's called content neutral? Now, if that's difficult to do, and it is, now I think that a lot of psychometric tests, including the SAT, including intelligence tests, have done amazing jobs of making things as culturally neutral as possible. I don't know if you can ever get anything 100%, but I think we're in the high 99.9s. Let's look at stereotype threat. This is an interesting one, and it's a relatively sensitive topic. And it's the idea that members of a group who were thought to be, and I put a blank there. Let's say there's members of a group who were thought to be unintelligent. Okay, maybe a certain ethnic group, and society has, for whatever reason, has said these people are like that. Remember the homogeneity effect. Well, imagine a child growing up as part of that group. Imagine countless number of messages, overtly or covertly, they've seen through media, through magazines, websites, YouTube, even messages in school that, oh, that group, you know how those people are. You're going to absorb that. It's going to some level, even though you know you're not supposed to consciously buy in, on some level it might affect you. So if you give a member of a certain group who has heard all their life that this group isn't very smart, you give them an IQ test or intelligence test, they're not going to do very well. They're going to do a little bit less than average. I don't know the exact cause, but stereotype threat basically means if you're part of a group that society thinks isn't very smart and you are told you're going to take an intelligence test, your score might be below average. And some people think, aha, I knew that group, and confirmation bias. And it says this group isn't smart. Now, here's the kicker, right? If you were to not tell members of that group it's an intelligence test, and you were to use a little bit of deception, and you're to say, hey, can you help me proofread this test? Or can you see how hard this test is? Or somehow or another, you don't make it seem like their self-value is on the line, or you don't activate their preconceived notions of what society's told them, then there's virtually no difference. So the interesting thing about stereotype threat is that if a person is reminded of their ethnicity or their group affiliation before they take in a given test, then unfortunately that might reduce how they do on that test. So then, you look at this bullet point: to reduce stereotype threat, what about deception? Maybe you don't tell people it's an intelligence test. Okay. Another way to kind of make the test as fair as possible is you frame the test. And again, that might involve a little bit of deception where you tell the test, no, it's not an IQ test. It's this test. Okay. And then self-fulfilling prophecy. I think you've seen this before. People sometimes, and not just sometimes, but very often conform to their expectations. And I think there's been quite a few studies that if you tell an elementary school teacher, give them pre-warning, oh my gosh, this student is so very bright. They might have a little bit of behavioral problems, but if you work with them, you will see some amazing stuff. Once you put that in the teacher's mind, when the student starts on the first day of school, those first couple of days and weeks, guess what? The teacher teaches the student more, gives them more attention, the student flourishes. And I think, unfortunately, that happens on the other side, where if you tell teachers, this child, you know what, they just don't have it. Well, then the teacher might, kind of treat the child differently. And guess what? If the teacher's not giving the child attention, then they're not going to flourish. The teacher doesn't give more attention. And I think you can understand how that goes. Okay. Let's talk about our homework. Now, this is going to be a big one. We have 8 bullet points. Since we're kind of almost out of time, I'm not going to read it to you, but remember, 8 bullet points. That's going to be the format of the first FRQ coming on May 19th. The 2021 has, two FRQs. The first one's a biggie, 8 bullet points. So what I want you to do is press the stopwatch and hit go. Now, it doesn't have to be right now. Do it later. Take a deep breath, go get a snack, or do what you want to do. But I really want you to test this under what we call testing conditions and see where you fare on this. Okay. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. I won't see you tomorrow. You'll see me tomorrow. Thanks for watching. We hope you'll join us again. Be sure to complete the practice question. We'll review the answer in the next lesson.